Hello everyone and welcome to part 2 of our campaign speedrun series. We finished off episode 1 with the first launch from a fresh campaign touching down at the Kerbal Space Center. In episode 1 we used a massive stack of hot decoupled flea boosters to get us to orbit on the first launch in a campaign. This is episode 2 in a series, so if you haven't seen that video yet, please go check it out. A link will be in the description. Upon touching down, I realized that I didn't have the amount of research points that I wanted in order to do the second launch. However, when you're Kerbal powered, there is always a way. A lot of the areas around the Kerbal Space Center count as a unique biome in terms of the crew reports on the ground, and by having fearless scientist Bob Kerman push our craft around to all these different locations, we can collect the research points that we need. And to cap things off, Bob Kerman went for a swim to pick up one additional EVA report. Bob's extra footwork has gotten us to 294 research points. We now have enough to pick up a couple missions at the mission control, upgrade the vehicle assembly building, and then research up to basic science, general construction, and propulsion systems. Because I've upgraded propulsion systems, but not docking and field transfer, what we're going to be orbiting here is 4 separate orbiters. The bottom stage here is powered by 9 Reliance and 1 Swivel. Doing this mission was kind of a case study in exactly how bad the swivel is. I did need one for the gimbal, but other than that, I wanted to avoid it as bad as possible. I encourage you to take a look at the numbers on this thing. Being as that I only had the gimbal from a single swivel engine, keeping this craft on the correct attitude was very difficult, and getting the proper gravity turn from the initial ascent was really critical. On the way up, we're going to do a little more science and snag a little bit more of those sweet research points. Now that we've got some elevation, the upper stage of the launch is achieved with a cluster of 7 Terrier engines. The Terrier stage is going to get us up close to orbital velocity, and then up into space, and then to a full orbit. Now that we're in a low Kerbin orbit, let's take a look at what we've delivered here. Since field transfer and docking isn't available to us, the 4 orbiters that we've put in low orbit all operate independently. And I've brought actually 4 Kerbal pilots with us, so we'll be able to land them one at a time. Bob Kerman, being the scientist, is going to do most of the legwork here into going to places, and we're going to use the other Kerbals to land each orbiter and get the research points from it. With 4 orbiters, this is quite a lot of flying, so this video is going to focus on the mission of the first one, and then I'm going to make a cut for the video, and part 3 will feature the next. We want to progress our missions along as well as getting research points, so the first orbiter is going to plumb out Kerbin's 2 moons. First we're going to go to the Mun. After transferring to the Moon, my targeted landing spot is the entrance of the slot-like crevice near the equator. This location has proximity to several different biomes, which is going to maximize the amount of research points that we can get from the surface. The Mun landing was a bit tricky. There's too much gravity on the Moon for me to land balanced on the end, so I wanted to land belly down. This was a little bit tricky to do without damaging the craft. The adjacent biome on the Moon ended up being down a rather steep slope from our landing location, so I had to very carefully ease myself down into the bottom of the crater. To prevent damage during the ascent, I very carefully throttled up the engine to keep myself at a safe speed. With some more legwork from Bob Kerman, as well as a little bit of puddle jumping, I was able to conduct research on the surface of the Moon within several more of its biomes. Taking off from the Moon was a little bit tricky. Thankfully, Bob was able to use the door-assisted takeoff maneuver. Our next step was to complete a transfer over to the second moon, Minmus. Minmus is not only going to be easier to navigate due to its lower mass, but also, for some reason, gives more research points. The landing location wasn't as critical on Minmus because due to its low amount of gravity, it didn't take much delta V to puddle jump from one biome to the next biome on the surface. Using this approach, I was able to conduct research on the surface of Minmus within most of its surface biomes, which constituted most of the science points that I'm going to get out of this particular part of the launch. With the min-miss phase complete, it was a fairly simple matter to transfer back into a highly elliptical suborbital orbit around Kerbin. I chose to eschew a gravity assist off of the moon here, being as that we did have some extra delta V and that there was no other utility for it. And then slowly aerobrake down into a circular low Kerbin orbit. We do want to land this particular rocket and take advantage of the research points we've gotten to unlock some stuff back at the Kerbal Space Center, but we don't want to lose our scientist. We want to keep him in orbit so he can keep resetting the research modules. As a result, we're going to switch pilots and land this using one of the pilots. While landing this with Valentina was a fairly simple order, I did want to take this as an opportunity to check a research box that we were unlikely to get otherwise, and I made sure that our landing approach aimed for a desert biome. The biggest challenge here was making sure that Valentina landed with all our science data. I'm going to crash land the rocket and parachute Valentina in, so what I needed to do was have her leave the crew module and then very quickly take data before air resistance separated the two of them. From this point on, it's a fairly straightforward, if exciting, paraglide for Valentina down to the surface of the Kerbin Desert. And with that, I'm going to send this episode off into the sunset. In the next episode, I'm going to take the next couple rocket modules and see what else in the Kerbal system we can explore. See you in the next one.